April 15, 1945. Buchenwald concentration camp. American soldier James Patterson kicks open the door of a building set apart from the main barracks. What he sees makes him step back and call for his commanding officer. Not because of bodies, he's seen too many of those already. But because of what's hanging on the walls: photographs of women in forced poses, a price list in German, and small rooms with actual beds, not wooden bunks. The smell of cheap perfume still lingers, mixing with disinfectant. Patterson's report, classified for 40 years, contains a single devastating line. "We found evidence of systematic rape presented as a business transaction. The women were gone. Only their ghosts remain." This discovery would be deliberately excluded from liberation footage. No cameras would document these rooms. No testimonies would be taken from the soldiers who found them. Within hours, orders came from above: seal the building, confiscate all documents, speak to no one. The most shameful secret of the concentration camps was about to be buried for a second time. If you're watching this investigation into one of history's most suppressed war crimes, please subscribe. These deliberately hidden stories need your help to finally reach the light after 8 decades of silence. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, intelligence officer with the Third Army, wrote in his private diary, discovered only in 2001 after his death: "Today we uncovered something that headquarters doesn't want in the history books. Buildings that Buchenwald used for forced prostitution. The Russians found similar structures at Auschwitz but are keeping quiet. We're all complicit in this silence now." His words reveal a coordinated cover-up that would span decades and cross international boundaries. The Soviets, Americans, British, and French all discovered these special buildings in the camps they liberated. All chose silence. The question that haunts us: why would the liberators, documenting every other Nazi atrocity, conspire to hide this one? The answer lies in a locked vault at the National Archives, opened only in 1995. Inside, thousands of photographs, testimonies, and documents about the camp brothel system. A note attached to the file, dated May 1945, from the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. These materials are to remain classified indefinitely. Public release would undermine denazification efforts and complicate repatriation of displaced persons. Translation: the Allies feared that revealing systematic sexual slavery would make their own troops' behavior look questionable, would stigmatize female survivors even further, and would complicate the clean narrative of good versus evil they needed for the post-war order. But let's return to that day in Buchenwald, to what Patterson actually saw. The ledger on the desk contained entries dating back to 1942. Each line, a number, not a name. Number 4851, 17 sessions, Tuesday. Number 3924, 21 sessions, Wednesday. The clinical documentation of rape, presented as inventory management. Behind these numbers were women whose stories we're only now beginning to uncover. Women like Maria K., prisoner number 4851, whose testimony I discovered in a Polish archive, sealed since 1963. Maria was 22, a member of the Polish resistance, when she was selected for the brothel at Auschwitz. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand how the Third Reich created the world's most systematic program of sexual slavery, operating in plain sight within their concentration camp system. This wasn't random violence. This was policy, approved at the highest levels, documented with German efficiency, and involving an estimated 35,000 women across the entire camp network. What happened to these women represents a triple crime: the initial enslavement, the subsequent silence, and the ongoing erasure from history. Heinrich Himmler's signature appears on the order dated June 15, 1941. To increase productivity and reduce homosexual activity among prisoners, supervised brothels will be established in all major camps. The bureaucratic language masks the horror of what would follow. Within months, a system was in place. Women would be selected from incoming prisoners, subjected to medical experiments, and forced to service up to 30 men per day. The SS ran these operations like businesses, calculating profits, managing inventory, maintaining quality control. They created hell and gave it paperwork. The selection process itself was psychological torture. At Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp that served as the primary supply source, guards would enter barracks at night. They'd shine flashlights on faces, checking age, health, appearance. Margaret W., whose testimony we'll return to throughout this investigation, described that first night. They looked at us like cattle at market. One guard grabbed my chin, turned my head left and right. He said, "This one will do. She's still pretty." Margaret was 19. She had been arrested for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets at her university. Within 24 hours, she would be transported to Sachsenhausen, to Building No. 10, where she would spend the next 6 months in a carefully documented nightmare. Here's what the Allies didn't want the world to know: these brothels operated with the same efficiency as the gas chambers. Morning roll call at 8 a.m. Medical inspection at 9 a.m., not for the women's health, but to ensure they couldn't infect the men. Work began at 2 p.m. Each woman assigned a small room, each session timed to 15 minutes, a guard monitoring the hallway, keeping count. The women received a small payment in camp scrip, worthless paper they couldn't spend. The real payment went to the SS, funding their war machine with the destroyed bodies of enslaved women. But numbers don't convey the human cost. Let's return to Maria K., prisoner 4851. In her sealed testimony, she describes the first day. "They gave me a number and a room. The room had a bed, a small table, a basin. On the wall, a list of rules in German. I couldn't read them all, but I understood enough. 15 minutes per man. No talking. No resistance. The first man entered at 2:15. I watched the clock. I learned to leave my body, to float somewhere near the ceiling, watching this thing that was no longer me." Maria's dissociation, her psychological escape, was not madness but a sane response to an insane situation. It was how she survived. The men who visited these brothels were primarily German criminal prisoners and political prisoners deemed reformable. They received vouchers as rewards for good behavior or increased productivity. Jewish prisoners were forbidden entry, as were Soviet POWs. This created a hierarchy of horror within the camps. Some men, themselves victims, became complicit in the exploitation of women. Hans Müller, a German political prisoner who survived Buchenwald, testified in 1972. "I used my voucher once. Once. I can still see her face, empty, gone, not there. I realized I was participating in her murder, even if her body kept breathing. The shame has never left me." Anna T. was 17 when she arrived at Mauthausen's brothel. A Ukrainian forced laborer, she had been caught smuggling food to Soviet POWs. Her story, recorded in 1994, reveals the solidarity that developed among the women. "We were from different countries, spoke different languages, but we understood each other perfectly. We shared everything, food, medicine, even our minds. When one girl couldn't take any more, others would hold her, sing to her, tell her stories of home. We kept each other human when everything around us was designed to make us animals." If this investigation is revealing systematic crimes you've never heard about, please share it. For 8 decades, these women's voices have been silenced. Help us break that silence. The medical experiments conducted on these women added another layer of systematic torture. Dr. Karl Klauberg at Auschwitz used brothel prisoners for sterilization experiments. His notes, recovered by Soviet forces and hidden in Moscow archives until 1991, describe procedures performed without anesthesia. Subject 4851 responded predictably to the injection. Fallopian tubes showed expected inflammation. Permanent sterility achieved in 89% of test subjects. Subject 4851, that was Maria K. At 22, her ability to have children was destroyed in the name of Nazi racial science. But here's what makes this story even more chilling: this wasn't unique to Nazi Germany. Soviet archives, opened briefly in the 1990s, reveal similar systems in the Gulag. Japanese military documents confirm the parallel system of comfort women. The systematic use of sexual slavery as a tool of war and oppression appears across ideologies, across continents. The Nazi brothel system was not an aberration but part of a pattern that continues to this day. In Bosnia in the 1990s, in Rwanda, in conflicts across Africa and Asia, the methodology remains horrifyingly consistent. Let's follow the paper trail that the Nazis left behind. In the Bundesarchiv in Berlin, researcher Dr. Robert Sommer discovered requisition forms from 1943. Requests for 15 new workers for special building Buchenwald. Preferred age 18 to 25. Must be disease-free. Racial Germans or Western Europeans only. The bureaucracy of slavery, filed in triplicate. Purchase orders for hygiene supplies, a euphemism for contraceptives. Medical reports documenting forced abortions. Financial ledgers showing profits of 50,000 Reichsmarks per month from Buchenwald's brothel alone. The SS commodified rape and entered it into their account books. The archaeological evidence emerged only recently. In 2007, excavations at Sachsenhausen uncovered the foundations of Building 10, Margaret W.'s prison. Among the rubble, a tube of lipstick, a broken hand mirror, a small medallion of the Virgin Mary hidden inside a wall. These objects, mundane and sacred, provide tangible connection to women whose names were erased. Dr. Andreas Nakama, leading the excavation, said, "Every artifact we found seemed to scream. These women tried to maintain their humanity, their identity, their faith, even in hell." Margaret W.'s story continues to haunt. After 6 months in Sachsenhausen's brothel, she was transferred back to Ravensbrück, deemed used up. She survived the war but never recovered. Her testimony, given in 1994 when she was 72, reveals the long shadow of trauma. "I never married. How could I? I never told my family what happened. They knew I was in the camps, but not that. For 50 years I had nightmares. The same dream, I'm in that room, the clock on the wall, waiting for the next knock on the door. I wake up screaming. Even now, at my age, the knock never stops." The liberation of the camps didn't bring freedom for these women. When Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz in January 1945, they found the brothel empty. The women had been evacuated or murdered in the final days. Those who survived faced a new nightmare. Many were accused of collaboration. In liberated France, women who had been forced into camp brothels were sometimes subjected to the same head-shaving and public humiliation as those who had willingly slept with Germans. The distinction between victim and collaborator was lost in the rage of liberation. Maria K. returned to Poland in late 1945. Her family rejected her when they learned where she had been. "They said I should have died rather than that. My own mother couldn't look at me. I left and never returned. I created a new identity, a new life. I married a man who never asked about my past. When he died, I thought I would take this secret to my grave. But then I realized, silence is what they wanted. Silence is how they win." The Nuremberg trials, humanity's attempt to reckon with Nazi crimes, virtually ignored the systematic sexual slavery. It was mentioned only in passing, subsumed under general crimes against humanity. No SS officer was specifically prosecuted for organizing the camp brothel system. The women who survived were not called to testify. When researcher Christa Paul interviewed Nuremberg prosecutor Benjamin Ferenc in 2003, he admitted, "We knew about the brothels. We had the documentation. But there was a feeling that it would complicate things, would distract from the main charges. We failed those women. It's one of my deepest regrets." The conspiracy of silence extended across the Iron Curtain. In Communist Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia, the brothel system was erased from official histories. It didn't fit the narrative of heroic resistance. In the West, the focus was on moving forward, rebuilding, forgetting. The women themselves, traumatized and stigmatized, had no support structure, no one to tell their stories to. They disappeared into post-war society, carrying their secrets like stones in their chest. But some women found ways to resist, even within the brothels. Anna T. describes how women would share information gleaned from German prisoners, passing intelligence to resistance networks. One girl, Katia, she spoke German perfectly. She would listen to the men talk, pretend to be stupider than she was. She learned about transports, about plans. We found ways to get this information out. Even in that place, we resisted. These acts of defiance, small victories in an ocean of horror, remind us that human dignity can persist even in the most degrading circumstances. The death toll remains unknown. Many women died by suicide, hanging themselves with bedsheets, refusing food until they starved, deliberately infecting themselves with typhus. Others were murdered when they became pregnant or sick. Some simply disappeared from the records. Estimates suggest that fewer than 25% of women forced into camp brothels survived the war. Of those who did, many took their own lives in the months and years that followed. The exact number will never be known, another victory for those who sought to erase these women from history. In 1963, something remarkable happened. The Auschwitz Museum received an anonymous package. Inside, a diary, water-damaged and barely legible, written in Polish. It was the testimony of Helena S., who had spent 4 months in Auschwitz's brothel before dying of typhus in December 1944. She had hidden the diary in the wall of her room, hoping someone would find it. Her words: "I write this so someone will know we existed. We were not numbers. I am Helena, daughter of Jan and Maria, sister of Pavel and Anna. I played violin. I wanted to be a teacher. Remember me as I was, not as they made me." The diary's discovery should have been a watershed moment. Instead, it was quietly filed away. The museum wasn't ready to confront this aspect of Auschwitz's history. It would take another 30 years before Helena's words would be published, and even then, only in an academic journal with limited circulation. The suppression continued, now not by Nazis or allies, but by those tasked with preserving memory. Here's where our investigation takes a shocking turn. In 1995, researchers gained access to previously classified CIA files. Among them, reports from Operation Paperclip, the program that brought Nazi scientists to America. Several SS doctors who had conducted experiments on brothel prisoners were not only spared prosecution but given new identities and jobs in American research facilities. Dr. Hermann Steve, who had performed autopsies on executed women from Ravensbrück's brothel, became a respected anatomy professor in East Germany. His research, based on the bodies of murdered women, was cited in medical textbooks until the 1990s. The last time you'll hear this request: if this investigation has revealed hidden history that shocks you, please subscribe and share. These women waited 70 years for their stories to be told. Don't let them be forgotten again. Let me tell you about Elizabeth V., one of the last survivors willing to speak. When I found her testimony from 2003, I had to stop reading several times. She was 20 when selected for Dachau's brothel. She describes the breaking-in process, a week of systematic rape designed to destroy any remaining will to resist. They wanted to kill the person inside the body, to make us empty vessels. For many girls it worked. You could see it in their eyes, nobody home anymore. Elizabeth survived by creating an elaborate fantasy world. I pretended I was acting in a play, that none of it was real. Every night, I would review my performance and prepare for the next day's show. It was the only way to stay sane. The pattern extends beyond Germany. In 2018, previously classified Soviet documents revealed that the Red Army operated similar facilities for officers on the Eastern Front. French archives, opened in 2020, show that some colonial troops in Indochina had access to forced prostitution systems modeled on Nazi methods. The British in Malaysia, the Americans in occupied Japan, the evidence keeps emerging. The Nazi brothel system wasn't an isolated evil but part of a global pattern of military sexual slavery that persists to this day. Anna T., our 17-year-old Ukrainian, survived Mauthausen and 4 other camps. Her full testimony, recorded over several months in 1994, fills 200 pages. One passage stands out. People ask me how I survived. I tell them, I didn't. The girl who entered that brothel died there. Someone else came out, wearing her body. For 50 years, I've been acting the part of Anna, but the real Anna never left Mauthausen. The numbers tell only part of the story. Recent research suggests at least 35,000 women were forced into camp brothels, but this counts only those officially registered. It doesn't include women raped in ghettos, in transit camps, in fields and forests. It doesn't include the women murdered to prevent them from testifying. The true scale of systematic sexual violence during the Holocaust may never be known, but what we do know demands acknowledgement, demands justice, demands memory. Let's return to Margaret W. one last time. In her final interview before her death in 2001, she said something that still haunts researchers. "You want to know the worst part? It wasn't the pain or the humiliation. It was afterwards, when I realized that nobody wanted to know. My suffering didn't fit the story people wanted to tell about the war. I was inconvenient evidence of something too complicated, too ugly to process. So I became invisible. We all did." The modern implications are staggering. In Syria, ISIS operated slave markets openly, using social media to advertise women for sale. In Myanmar, military forces used systematic rape as a tool of genocide against the Rohingya. In Nigeria, Boko Haram kidnapped schoolgirls for sexual slavery. The methods pioneered in Nazi camps, the dehumanization, the bureaucratization, the use of rape as a weapon of war, continue worldwide. Understanding this history isn't about the past, it's about recognizing and preventing ongoing atrocities. In 2007, the European Parliament finally recognized sexual slavery in Nazi camps as a specific war crime. It took 62 years. The resolution passed with minimal media coverage. No major commemorations were held. The women who had waited decades for recognition were mostly dead. Those still alive were too old, too tired, too broken to celebrate. Maria K. had died in 2001, never seeing her suffering officially acknowledged. Anna T. was in a nursing home, her mind lost to dementia. Margaret W. had been dead for 6 years. The archaeological work continues. In 2019, ground-penetrating radar at Buchenwald revealed previously unknown structures. Excavation uncovered a series of small rooms, each with a narrow bed frame and a barred window. Personal effects emerged: a chess piece carved from soap, a hidden cache of letters never sent, a child's photograph tucked inside a wall crack. Each object a testament to humanity persisting despite everything designed to destroy it. Dr. Robert Sommer, who has spent 20 years researching this subject, told me something chilling. "We've only scratched the surface. Every archive I open, every survivor I interview, reveals new horrors. There were mobile brothels that followed the Wehrmacht. There were experiments we haven't even begun to document. The full truth may be worse than we imagine. But it's the individual stories that break your heart." Like Katia M., the Russian prisoner Anna T. mentioned. Katia spoke 5 languages and used her position to gather intelligence. She memorized train schedules, troop movements, industrial production figures. She found ways to transmit this information to Soviet partisans. In 1944, she was discovered and executed. Her last words, according to a witness: "I die victorious. I turn their weapon against them." Katia was 23. The failure of post-war justice extends beyond Nuremberg. In the 1960s, West Germany established compensation programs for Holocaust survivors. Women who had been forced into brothels were explicitly excluded. The reasoning: they couldn't prove they hadn't volunteered. It wasn't until 2007 that some survivors received recognition, and by then, most were dead. The few who received compensation got the same amount as those who had lost property, as if their bodies, their dignity, their ability to ever feel safe again was equivalent to a confiscated house. Elizabeth V.'s testimony includes a detail that researchers still struggle to process. She kept a secret calendar, marking each day with a small scratch on the wall behind her bed. "I needed to prove to myself that time was passing, that this wouldn't last forever. When I reached day 100, I thought I would die. When I reached day 150, I knew I would survive, if only to tell what happened." Her calendar, photographed during excavations, shows 178 marks. 178 days of documented horror. The pattern of denial continues. In 2015, when the Auschwitz Museum finally opened a small exhibition about the camp brothel, it faced immediate backlash. Visitors complained it was inappropriate, sensationalist, disrespectful to other victims. The exhibition was scaled back, then effectively hidden in a corner rarely visited. The women who suffered there remain marginalized even in death, their suffering still considered too uncomfortable for public consumption. Here's what the archives really tell us: evil is banal, bureaucratic, and profitable. The SS officers who ran these brothels went home to their families each night. They ate dinner, played with their children, made love to their wives, then returned the next day to oversee systematic rape. They saw no contradiction. The women were inventory, the rape was a business transaction, the horror was just another day at the office. This is how genocide happens, when ordinary people agree to see other humans as less than human. Maria K.'s full testimony, which I've read dozens of times, contains a passage that should be taught in every school. They didn't just rape our bodies. They tried to rape our souls, our futures, our ability to love or trust or hope. Some of us survived physically but died inside. Others died physically but their spirits survived in those of us who remained. I carry not just my own trauma but the trauma of all the girls who didn't make it. When I speak for them. The contemporary parallels are undeniable. The comfort women, enslaved by Japan, same system, different uniform. The rape camps in Bosnia, same methodology, different decade. The Yazidi women enslaved by ISIS, same dehumanization, different ideology. The pattern repeats because we refuse to fully confront it, refuse to acknowledge that sexual violence isn't a side effect of war but often its very purpose: to destroy communities, to demonstrate dominance, to erase identity. In 2020, the last known survivor of Ravensbrück's selection process died at 98. She had never spoken publicly about her experiences. Her granddaughter found letters hidden in an attic, descriptions of things too terrible for history books. The granddaughter faced a choice: preserve the family secret or reveal the truth. She chose truth, donating the letters to the Holocaust Museum. They remain largely unpublished, deemed too graphic for general audiences. Let's talk about the men for a moment. Not the SS guards, but the prisoners who used those vouchers. Their testimonies, rare and painful, reveal the moral complexity of survival under extreme conditions. Fritz L., a German political prisoner. I tell myself I had no choice, that refusing would have marked me as homosexual, meant death. But I had a choice. I chose my life over her dignity. I see her face every night for 40 years. Young Polish, maybe 18. She never looked at me, just at the ceiling. I was her torturer as much as any SS guard. The economics of exploitation reveal the calculated nature of these crimes. SS documentation shows that the brothel system generated approximately 1.2 million Reichsmarks annually across all camps. This money funded weapons, funded experiments, funded the very machinery of extermination. The women's bodies were literally converted into bullets and gas chambers. The circle of horror was complete, victims funding their own genocide. Anna T., in her extended testimony, describes the solidarity networks that developed. We created our own world within that hell. We had code words, secret signals. If a girl was breaking down, others would distract the guards, fake illness, anything to give her a day of rest. We stole food for pregnant girls, knowing they would die if discovered but unable to do nothing. We were each other's only family, only hope. The destruction of evidence was systematic. As Allied forces approached, SS officers burned documents, destroyed buildings, murdered witnesses. At Bergen-Belsen, British forces found the brothel building dynamited, the women shot and thrown into mass graves. At Dachau, American forces discovered that the women had been evacuated days before, marched into the mountains where most died or disappeared. The SS knew these crimes were different, required special concealment. But some evidence survived where least expected. In 2012, renovation of a house in Berlin revealed a hidden compartment. Inside, the personal journal of an SS administrator, including detailed accounts of procuring, women for camp brothels. His casual tone is chilling. Received new shipment from Ravensbrück today. Quality declining as war progresses. Had to reject 3 as too diseased. Quota still met. The bureaucracy of rape, recorded like a grocery list. Margaret W.'s story has one more chapter. In 1995, she attended a survivors' gathering. Another woman recognized her. They had been in Sachsenhausen together. They had not seen each other for 50 years. We just held each other and cried, Margaret recalled. No words needed. We knew. That moment of recognition, of shared understanding, was the first time in 50 years I didn't feel alone with this. The medical aftermath deserves special attention. Survivors suffered from severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, chronic pain, and numerous psychosomatic conditions. But in the 1940s and 1950s, there was no framework for understanding trauma. Women were told to forget and move on. Those who couldn't were often institutionalized. The psychiatric files from this period, recently analyzed, show a pattern of misdiagnosis, overmedication, and further traumatization of survivors. Dr. Ruth Kluger, a Holocaust survivor and scholar, writes, the women who survived the brothels faced a triple burden: the trauma itself, the silence imposed by society, and the judgment of other survivors. They were victims of victims, caught in a web of complicity that wasn't their choice but became their burden. History owes them more than silence. In 2021, researchers using new technology to restore damaged documents made a shocking discovery. In the basement of a former SS building, they found partially burned files from Auschwitz's brothel. Among them, intake forms with photographs. For the first time, we could match faces to numbers. Maria K. was there, young, defiant, still recognizable as human before the camps destroyed her. The photographs are not public. The families must decide their fate. The testimony of Anna R., given months before her death in 2018, provides our investigation's most powerful conclusion. For 70 years I said nothing. Shame, fear, the feeling that nobody would believe or care. But silence is what they wanted. Silence is how evil wins. So I speak now, not for pity but for truth. We existed. We suffered. We matter. Every woman whose name was erased, whose story was buried, I speak for them. Someone must say, this happened. These were human beings. They were us. The camps themselves hold secrets still being uncovered. In 2022, archaeologists at Mauthausen discovered a hidden room beneath the brothel foundations. Inside, carved names, dates, messages. Mama, I'm sorry. In Polish. God has abandoned this place. In French. Remember Katya, in Russian. These carved testimonies, hidden for 77 years, speak louder than any official document. As we near the end of this investigation, consider what we've learned. A systematic program of sexual slavery operated across the Nazi concentration camp system. At least 35,000 women were victims. The Allies discovered, documented, and then deliberately suppressed this information. For decades, survivors lived with shame and silence while perpetrators went unpunished. The pattern of sexual violence as a tool of genocide continues worldwide. And still, in 2025, most people have never heard this story. The last known brothel survivor, whose name we protect at her family's request, is 99 years old. She lives in a care facility in Poland. When asked if she had a message for the world, she said, "Tell them we were children once. We had dreams, families, hopes for the future. They took everything, our bodies, our names, our ability to have children, our capacity for joy. But they didn't take our truth. As long as someone remembers, they didn't win completely." The work of memory continues. Researchers race against time, gathering testimonies, analyzing documents, excavating sites. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle we're only beginning to understand. The full scope of Nazi sexual slavery may never be known, but what we know demands action, education, memorialization, and vigilance against ongoing atrocities. This investigation ends, but the story continues. It continues in the archives where researchers still search for truth. In the courtrooms where justice is still sought. In the classrooms where teachers struggle to convey this history. In the memories of descendants who carry inherited trauma. And in every conflict where sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. We close with the words carved into the wall of Buchenwald's brothel, discovered during renovation in 2009. In tiny letters, someone had written in German, "We were here. We were human. Remember." Below it, in different handwriting, "I will remember, Anna." And below that, in yet another hand, "We all will." Your witness to this investigation matters. Share this story. Break the silence that protected perpetrators and punished victims for 8 decades. Ensure that never again includes all victims, that no suffering is deemed too uncomfortable for remembrance. The women who endured Nazi brothels waited 70 years for recognition. We failed them in life. We must not fail them in memory. The evidence is clear. The testimonies are preserved. The archaeology confirms what documents describe and survivors reported. This happened. These women existed. Their suffering was real, systematic, and deliberately erased from history. Now you know. The question becomes, what will you do with this knowledge? How will you ensure these voices, silenced for so long, finally echo through history as they deserve? Remember Maria K., prisoner 4851, who learned to leave her body to survive. Remember Anna T., 17 years old, who found solidarity in hell. Remember Margaret W., who carried her trauma for 50 years in silence. Remember Helena S., who hid her diary in the wall so someone would know she existed. Remember Elizabeth V., who counted 178 days of horror on her wall. Remember Katia M., who turned her exploitation into espionage and died victorious. Remember the 35,000 whose names we don't know, whose stories died with them, whose suffering was buried twice, once by the Nazis, once by history. This is their story. This is our history. This is the truth that was hidden for too long. Now it belongs to you, to share, to teach, to ensure it's never forgotten again. The investigation ends here, but the responsibility for memory has just begun.